I'm not sure when Sulocan Prabhu got access to Prabhupada's letters, but from what I've been able to piece together, it must have been just after this. What I read is that someone at the BBT, and personally I don't know who that person was, and I'm not going to speculate, but that person had given Sulocan a microfilm copy of all of Srila Prabhupada's letters. This was probably sometime in 1985, maybe 6 to 8 months after the incident I just described. At that time, the BBT was using microfilm as a means to make archival records of the letters. That was the acceptable medium at the time. Sulocan was the first devotee to do research on the ISKCON Guru multi-Guru system using Srila Prabhupada's letters, as no one else outside the BBT had access to those letters. Sulocan had originally wanted to research what Srila Prabhupada had written to and about Kirtanananda Swami. The reason was that Sulocan's wife wanted to surrender to Kirtanananda and accept him as her guru. Sulocan has written that he was willing to accept that his wife could accept Kirtanananda as her guru, but he had also heard from other devotees that at times Kirtanananda didn't always get along with Srila Prabhupada and often acted independently. So Sulocan just wanted to do his own research, his own due diligence to verify if Kirtanananda was actually qualified to act as guru for his wife. I met Sulocan personally in the early 1980s when he and his wife were living in New Vrindavan, and my wife's and my impression of him was that he was a very simple, sincere, friendly, unbecoming devotee who was, just devoted to Srila Prabhupada. His original motive and intention wasn't driven by enviousness. The husband is supposed to care for his wife and look out for her best spiritual interests, which is what Sulocan innocently and responsibly set out to do. He was a concerned husband who wanted to do what was best for his wife. He had heard that Prabhupada had written some letters chastising Kirtanananda, and at first all he wanted to do was to see if he could find those letters and see what it was all about. Somehow he knew a devotee who worked at the BBT, and he was able to obtain the microfilm copies of all of Srila Prabhupada's letters. At that time, 1985, none of the letters were digitized. That came about later. So the microfilm was just a miniature photographic copies of the documents on film that had to be viewed on a microfilm fetcher, they called it a viewing machine. Since the letters weren't digitally scanned, there was no way to do a computerized search, so Sulocan had to read through thousands and thousands of letters to try to find the information related to Kirtanananda to see if he was really the best guru for his wife. But what he found was evidence that made him question the validity of the entire current guru system in ISKCON. Aside from researching the letters, he also spoke to devotees in New Vrindavan who knew the darker side of the activities going on there. He discovered that Kirtanananda was at least suspected of overseeing drug running and sales of illegal drugs, illegal sales of bootlegged records, prostitution, and forced abortions. Devotee girls were forced to or convinced to give up their babies so they could go and be sent back out on the pick, selling bootleg copies of records and to bring in money for Kirtanananda's temples. Thus he saw that Kirtanananda was more of a black market businessman than of a self-realized saint. He was at least suspect. And then he heard stories of Kirtanananda molesting boys. And there were rumors that he may be connected with the murder of several devotees. As he heard these rumors, along with the research from Prabhupada's letters, he began compiling his findings in what eventually became a book which he called The Guru Business. He and his wife had already moved to New Vrindavan. And as he heard these rumors of these dark aspects of Kirtanananda's dealings, he would share them with his wife, as it was for her benefit that he was originally setting out to verify if Kirtanananda was qualified to be her guru or not. But she took his criticisms toward Kirtanananda as a major fall down on his part. She thought her husband was making offenses against a pure devotee. Out of concern, she informed the temple authorities in New Vrindavan. Originally, her idea was that they would help save her husband from falling down. But the temple authorities convinced her that due to his committing grave offenses against the pure devotee Kirtanananda, they convinced her that to protect her spiritual life, she must must leave her husband. Yet they already had children together. Sulocan felt his wife and children were being taken away from him only because he had found evidence that Kirtanananda was not the pure devotee so many, including his wife, believed he was. He was only trying to help her. But now his family was being torn apart. The temple authorities gave facilities to his wife so that she could leave him, and they even gave her advice and guidance on how to file for a divorce so she could win the full custody of their children. Sulocan's life had totally fallen apart, all because his research led him to believe that Kirtanananda was not the pure devotee that he was held up to be. All because he was trying to do the best thing for his wife. As his own life, his marriage and family was torn apart, he felt more compelled to get to the truth about the gurus in ISKCON, not just to save his wife and own children and their marriage, but now he wanted to do this as his service to Srila Prabhupada. Had Srila Prabhupada really appointed those 11 men to become the next gurus? The evidence he was finding was that regarding Kirtanananda, he was more of a racketeering crime boss than a pure devotee. And a few years later, the federal government agreed, as Kirtanananda was sentenced to federal prison for racketeering, mail fraud, I think child molestation, and criminal intent to commit murder. No way would Srila Prabhupada have selected him to be guru. Was this whole guru idea nothing but a big lie? Had these men turned the post of guru into a racketeering guru business? That's what prompted Sulocan to turn his research work into a book about the gurus in ISKCON. He noted how, at least in the case of Kirtanananda, Hamsadutta, Rameshwar, and others, they were running more like a guru business. They sent out new members on what used to be Sankirtan, distributing Srila Prabhupada's books, but by the mid-1980s was now referred to as the PIC. The PIC, where the new members would go out and sell hats, buttons, oftentimes with foul, degrading messages printed on them, bootlegged illegal copies of rock and roll records. Some of the girls were even being pimped out for prostitution. There was drug running, sales of illegal street drugs, all to bring in money for the temples of the new gurus. It was a very dark time for ISKCON in those last years of the zonal acharya system. And Sulocan found himself in the midst of exposing that darkness so that the sincere devotees and followers of Srila Prabhupada would wake up and see what was really going on. He wasn't motivated out of enviousness, but he was genuinely concerned out of love for Srila Prabhupada and his mission. He began sharing his writings with more and more devotees. His original hope was that if others read what he had uncovered, that the devotees in mass would rise up and call out Kirtanananda for the fallen fraud he was, and he was hoping that his wife would realize that he was right and would come back to him. But regardless of whether his marriage could ever be saved, he now took this as a service to Srila Prabhupada and to expose what was going on. While he was still in New Vrindavan, he also shared much of his research and realization with those who would listen. All he wanted to do was educate the devotees and wake them up to the real facts. Not all of Sulocan's conclusions were right, but in general, he was. As it turned out, he was mostly right about Kirtanananda and the shady and non-Vaishnav dealings he engaged in. However, one devotee Sulocan is claimed to have talked to and shared his understandings to. One day he took up a metal bar and hit Kirtanananda on the head in an attempt to murder him. Kirtanananda was seriously injured, was in coma for days. Afterwards, his skull had been cracked and crushed. He did survive, however. The temple authorities blamed Sulocan for spreading what they thought at that time were just horrible lies about Kirtanananda. Sulocan had to flee New Vrindavan for his life. And soon he completed his book and published it in May of 1986. 2 days later, on May 22nd, 1986, he was murdered by a devotee hitman who had been sent from New Vrindavan. He was paid $8,000 by a leader in the New Vrindavan community to hunt Sulocan down and murder him. Early in the morning, he shot Sulocan in the head while he sat defensively in his motorhome, which was parked just down the street from the LA temple. I will only mention here that some devotees have accused one of ISKCON's current and popular gurus as being the one who ordered Sulocan's murder. I'm not going to say any more than that in this presentation. I'm not going to accuse that person of being guilty of those accusations. I chose to say this much only because this much we know is true, that devotees that were involved in the affairs of New Vrindavan at the time have insisted this particular person, who is now one of ISKCON's current gurus, was directly involved. And some say he is the one who ordered Sulocan's murder. Why am I even including this here in this presentation when there is no actual proof? Is because I know one of the devotees making that account is sincere, and the account seems credible enough that I feel at least it should be mentioned. The FBI also suspected this, but they couldn't find enough evidence at the time, so the district attorney didn't indict that devotee. I'm a firm believer in educating people and letting them make their own informed choice. I fully oppose propagating unscrupulous rumors, and that's why I'm not stating this as a fact. But I find it credible enough to warrant to at least pointing this out, to encourage devotees to do your own due diligence. After Sulocan's murder, Rolling Stone magazine had not an article, but the cover of the magazine was Dial Om for Murder, which was taken from a 1950s movie titled Dial M for Murder. Anyway, their article about this Sulocan's murder and all was not a very nicely written. It was actually had a lot of untruths in it. But as I said, I had first met Sulocan and his wife when they were still living together at his home in New Vrindavan in the early 1980s. And I saw him later in 1985 when he was living out of his motorhome in Los Angeles while he was visiting there. We considered him a friend. My wife and I, our impression of him was that he was just a sincere disciple of Srila Prabhupada. In his Guru Business book, Sulocan argued that Srila Prabhupada never appointed the 11 men as gurus. Actually, I've never read the book in full. I have read excerpts here and there, and I don't agree with all his conclusions. But he did uncover and began exposing very dark sides of at least one gone bad ISKCON guru. His book and findings spurred a number of devotees to question the path the GBC had taken and question whether Srila Prabhupada actually appointed those 11 Ritviks to actually become gurus, or if he only wanted them to remain Ritvik representatives. Besides his book, he also made copies of a number of Prabhupada's letters, which had been banned up to that time, and he was passing them out to devotees. One of those letters was the July 9th Ritvik appointment letter, or the list as it was called back then. And it's from Sulocan's efforts that a number of devotees finally got to read that letter for the very first time. His research inspired other devotees to also do their own further research. From the beginning of the multi-guru system in ISKCON, a number of Prabhupada's disciples knew there were major problems. By the mid-1980s, everyone except the zonal acharyas themselves clearly understood that the zonal acharya system had gone off the rails and was not at all what Srila Prabhupada wanted for his mission. Too many gurus were falling, and falling in very horrible ways. Too many were going in the wrong direction. By the early to mid-1980s, Hamsadutta had gone ballistic. He became known as the machine gun guru. At one point, he was arrested for possession of an illegal firearm, but at another time, he even fired his machine gun into an occupied car dealership. Fortunately, no one was injured. He had literally gone ballistic. He was suspected of engaging devotees in illegal drug running to procure funds for his centers and his lifestyle. Jayatirtha was the very high priest of LSD. He had fallen several times, caught taking LSD and engaging in LSD-fueled sex romps with his own female disciples. Then there was the racketeering crime boss, Kirtanananda. Bhavananda was expelled for illicit sex with men. Rameshwar was soon to be found dating a young minor-aged girl, and there were rumors surrounding other gurus as well. But prior to Sulochan's work, the rank-and-file members lacked access to any information other than what the GBC told everyone. Finally, thanks to Sulochan's early work and for his ultimate sacrifice, for the very first time, devotees began to get access and could do their own research on this Ritvik Guru issue. When the few devotees got to read the July 9th letter for the first time and read the transcripts of the May 28th meeting, many came to the same conclusion as Sulochan had reached, and that was that the GBC was wrong and that Prabhupada actually only wanted us to follow the Ritvik Ras system. What devotees were discovering was that there was no definitive, hard, and clear evidence that Srila Prabhupada ever actually appointed the 11 Ritviks to become actual gurus. The reality was that the evidence that the GBC had claimed to be there all these years was just not there. There wasn't any clear and concise and indisputable evidence to uphold the path that the GBC had taken.